Welcome to Highline Excel 2016 class video number 10. Hey, if you'd like to download this file, Business 218 Video 10, or the PDF files, click on the link below the video. Hey, we have a great video here. We have to talk about Excel data validation. Now, data validation just means we're going to have the ability to, for a cell or a series of cells, add some rules that will only allow certain types of data into the cell. Now, we've already seen data validation earlier when we looked at lookup, but there we only looked at data validation list. All right, so we're going to look at a bunch of different things because data validation can do so many things. In this first example, we have a section of our template where we're entering bolt size. And for a particular bolt, this one, we're only allowed 1 inch to 5 inch here, 6 inch to 15 inch. So we want to prevent anyone from typing like a 6 here. So I'm going to highlight all 3 of the cells. And in this example, we have our limits in the cells. Data validation is up in Data, Data Tools, Data Validation, click. Escape. The keyboard is Alt-DL. So Alt-DL. Now, by default, any value is allowed. Now, that makes sense, but we click this drop down, and there's our amazing list of all sorts of things. You can have whole numbers, decimals, a list, dates, times, text length, and even custom true-false formulas. So we're going to start and look at each one of these whole numbers. First thing is you have to select your comparative operator. We're going to say between. The maximum, whoa, look, these are collapse button. That means the text box can be linked to the cell. I'm going to select B39. Notice it's a relative cell reference, and max will be B40. So in essence, this dialog box is going to hold these formulas in essence and copy them like relative references. Now, we can go to input message, and here we can type a title. Now, input message is what they'll see when they click in the cell. Error alert is what they'll see if they make an error. So for input message, so we'll type whole numbers, and then down here, whole numbers between the limits. So that'll show up when we click in the cell. Error alert. Stop means you'll get a dialog box and you're not allowed to enter the number. Warning will give you a dialog box. You'll have to click OK to accept it. And information is just a dialog box saying, hey, you shouldn't put that number here or that thing here. We're going to put a title here. Please enter a whole number between the limits. All right, let's check this out. Now, notice there's a 6 there. What? I'm clicking in the cell. It's trying to be polite and tell me. So all of the input message are working. But what's this 6? Hey, listen, when you do data validation, if there's something in the cell before you do data validation, then it's not going to prevent it from going into the cell. And here's the deal. Sometimes you have a huge column of tons of data that already exists. That's why up in Data, Data Validation, there's a circle invalid data. Right? So then it will circle. Especially when you have a huge column, then you go and fix all the circled data. I'm going to change this to 5. Hey, the circle went away. Sometimes you want the circles to go away anyway. You'd go here and clear validation circles. All right, so now we can test this. I'm going to say 50. And instantly our cool little dialog box we created pops up. Please enter a whole number between the limits. Retry. We have to then type some number like 12 or 15. Notice the between includes both of them. 6 is fine. 6.25 is not okay because it's not a whole number. Escape. Now, we want to look at one other problem. 50 over here. If I copy this and paste it right here. Remember, what does copy do? Copy pastes everything in that cell. So when I paste it here, Control V, now there's no longer any data validation. If we Alt DL, you can see the data validation is gone. So Control Z. I'm going to go ahead and leave that there. Pasting over will wreck your data validation. Hey, let's look at our next example. So here we have a hammer, and we want to prevent any number greater than 1995. So Alt-DL, and this is a decimal, so we're going to say allow decimal. Between, no, we want to
pick our comparative operator, less than or equal to, and the maximum is going to be 19.95 or whatever you want. Input message, I usually don't put an input message, but we will put an error, and this time we'll select warning, right? So maybe there's some situation when you'd want to enter the cost more than $19.95, so we're going to put a message over here, something like that, and then you could create your error message. Please enter a number less than or equal to 1950. So now I'll click OK. So 5 will work. 19.5 will work. 19.51, boom. Oh, I must have made a mistake. Alt-DL. Oh, and look at that. So it was 95. I'm going to change this to 50. Click OK. So you can edit it. Lucky I made that mistake so we can edit it. Oh, now we'd have to circle invalid data. But let's try 19.5. That one's fine. 19.51. And boom, we get our message. And this is a different message. It still gives us our message. Please enter a number less than 1950. But continue, yes or no. I'm going to say no. And then I'll change it to 18.5. But you have the choice there with warning. Now, just for kicks, let's come over here and let's see what the information option gives us. So if I have the cost here and I want to limit it to 1950 or less, Alt-DL, tab, and then D for decimal, tab, and then down arrow, let's say less than or equal to, tab, 19.50. Don't need the 0 there. Error alert. And let's come over and try this information. It should be 1950 or less or something like that. Click OK. So 19.49, that's looking good. 19.5, that's looking good. 19.51. It just gives us information. And we can click OK. There's no yes or no, just click OK and it will accept it. This one over here too, 19.51. We said no, but you are allowed to click yes and it is accepted. All right, now let's go look at a bunch more about data validation list. And we've already looked at the list feature. This is great. You can add a drop down based on some cells in your spreadsheet. Now we want to look at a bunch of options here, but let's remind ourselves what we did before. Alt-DL, tab, L, tab, and then I'm going to highlight these product names. There's an absolute cell reference. Click OK. And so then we have a drop down. That was very convenient when we were doing VLOOKUP, right? We didn't want to allow anything but the product names from a list. Hey, you can not only use a range, but you can use a define name also. And let's remind ourselves about our keyboard shortcut for naming a range. Field name at the top. The products are in rows below. Control Shift F3. That is create names from selection, and I'm going to select from the top row. Click OK. So now if I use my drop down, products. Whoop. So now Alt-DL, tab, L, tab, F3, because I don't remember what the name is. That gives me the paste name option. Double click, equal, and then the define name. Click OK. So that'll work also. Now, what if we wanted this dynamic? As we add new records, we want our drop downs to totally update. Well, we can use the Excel table feature. Now, this is kind of a deadly move. Although I have field name at the top, records and rows, and empty cells all the way around, I have data below. But just for this video, I'm only going to add one record. If this was a real data set or table where I'm adding lots of records, I'd never have data below. Click in a single cell, Control T. My table has headers. It should say my table has field names. Click OK. Now let's click in a single cell, go up to Design, Table Tools, and we want to name this. Give it a good name. Product names, enter. So now that is called product names. Now just for kicks, let's see what would happen if we tried to enter this table formula nomenclature. In fact, let's just create a formula. There's our drop down if I type PR. Oh, look, the icon for table, so I double click that. Square bracket brings up our list of field names. We can double click or tab, close square parentheses. I'm actually going to copy this, Control C, escape, and try and put it into the data validation dialog box. Alt D, L tab, equal sign, Control V. If I click OK, I'm going to get an error message. It doesn't allow table formula nomenclature. Now, I'm going to show you this here, and then I'm going to show you a better way to do it. But for whatever reason, if you ever had to have this table formula nomenclature in this source text box, you have to use the indirect function and put the table formula nomenclature in double quotes. Now, what in the world does indirect do? Indirect is actually quite a useful function. It's for when you have a reference that's showing up as text and you need to convert it back to a reference. Here, we tried to put in our reference. It's a legitimate table formula nomenclature reference, but we had to trick it by putting it in quotes, which means it's text, and indirect will know what to do with it. Click OK. And so our drop down shows up here. Now that is somewhat ridiculous because guess what? This define name is now pointing to a table, and the range that we use for this drop down is pointing towards a table. The fact that we did Control T after we created these two drop downs based on a range and a define name doesn't matter. When I add a new record here, all three of these will update and get a new record in the data validation dropdown. Now I'm actually going to come down here. When you download this, it'll be adjusted to the side. I'm not going to keep data below here. So I'm going to highlight that and use my move cursor. There's my move cursor. Click and drag down to top cell B66. All right, you ready? Now I'm going to come to the bottom of the data set and hit Tab and type SB weight. That's the name of the new boomerang. And instead of hitting Tab, I'm going to hit Enter. All right, now let's go check this out. Drum roll. There it is. Every single one of them. That was the range. Here's the define name. Even though we created these before and then created the table after, they totally update. So does this one. All right, so we have data validation drop down for range, define name, and table. Now, here's a couple other cool tricks here we're going to learn for data validation lips. In this situation, we have only one of two words that we want to allow in this cell, and I don't want to type them into cells off to the side, so I simply select the cell, Alt D, L tab, and we just type. Now we're going to have two words. All we have to do is separate them with a comma. Wholesale, resale, and the text does not have to be in double quotes. You just type it in, click OK, and now those two items will be in our drop-down list. Now our second example down here is a great one. Look at this. We have a collection of boomerangs for our boomerang tournaments. These are the boomerangs we use for freestyle event. These are the ones we use for fast catch. These are the ones we use for Australian round. And these are the boomerangs we use when it's windy. We want a drop down that picks the type or the category, freestyle, fast, Aussie, or win. And depending on what we have in this cell, the drop down over here will change. So if I put freestyle as type, I want the drop down to only have these three boomerangs. So we're going to use define names. I'm first going to start by naming this type. I come up to the name box, type, and enter. So that now is type. If I check the name box and point to type, boom, I can see that's working. Now, I don't want to have to do each one of these names individually, so we're going to learn a great trick. Over here, we used Control-Shift-F3 for create names from selection. Well, guess what? We're going to do all four with a single keystroke. And the trick is I highlight the first column, field name at the top, and then names below. Hold Control and highlight areas not next to each other. Notice each column is a different height. I'm using Control to highlight 4 individual columns. Now I use Control-Shift-F3. You got to be kidding me. Look at that. top row, click OK. And just like that, now in our drop down we have freestyle. It got it perfect. We have wind, and it got it perfect. All right, now we come over here. We'll add the first drop down, Alt D, L tab, L tab, F3 to paste a name. I'm going to select type. Equals type, that's a defined name, click OK. Now check this out. When we select from this drop down, that freestyle is a defined name. The only problem is when I put it into the cell like that, it's text. No problem. Alt D L, tab L tab. Well, guess what? We can't click on this cell right here by itself because that's text. Well, guess what? The indirect function comes to the rescue. We can use indirect. That function specifically takes text that represents a reference and converts it back to a reference. So this is twice we've used the indirect function. Click OK. You've got to be kidding me. It got it right. If I change this drop down to fast, then our drop down over here changes. I'm going to use the Darnell fast catch. So this is called data validation based on another data validation list, or dependent data validation list. Great trick for data validation. All right, now let's look down here at another great example. Here we have a schedule, and we want to look at data validation for date, time, and text length. I want to be able to put a date, a time, and some text. But for each column, I only want a date entered into the cell based on this upper and lower limit. No problem, just like we did up above. Highlight all the cells, Alt D L, tab. If we hit D, that gives us to decimal, so we have to use our arrow or our mouse to get date. And now between, tab, tab, the start date, that's the earlier date, tab, and the later date. We could put input an error, but I'm not going to. Click OK. Now if I type today's date, it's not going to let me. It'll give me an error message. Remember, if you want a more polite message, go ahead and fill out the text box more thoroughly. 1/5/2014 and enter. All right, now let's do the same thing for time. But here, unlike the date, which had the upper limits in the cells, we're simply going to type this in. We only want times after 8 a.m. Alt D L, tab T for time. Well, that one worked. Now, we got tab, and we want to select a different comparative operator. I want greater than or equal to 8 a.m. Click OK. So now if I type 7, going to get an error message. Escape 8:01. That's going to work. Now we want a text limit in our description. So Alt D L, tab T. Oh, that's not going to get to time, but I can down arrow to text length. Comparative operator, less than or equal to the maximum number of characters, 25. Click OK. So if I type a bunch of characters, I'm going to get an error message. Escape. Something under 25 or equal to 25, enter. That will work. So date, time, and text length. Hey, here's our last example. Actually, we have two examples to illustrate custom. Now, this is really the most powerful because you can use any logical formula that evaluates to true, the value will be allowed, or false, the value will not be allowed. Now, here's the thing. We're going to be putting prices here. So we want the data validation logical formula to be asking a true-false question of the actual value in the cell. So we never want to enter a price in any of these that's more than double the cost. So I'm going to highlight the whole range here. And in the active cell, Alt D L, tab C for custom tab. Well, we have to think about this. A cell. So I need to ask a question. Are you, the number in the cell, less than or equal to double this? So watch this in the formula. Relative cell reference, so it can copy down. Are you less than or equal to one cell to my left times 2? And again, you could put an input message to be polite and an error message. I just don't want to do that in the video. Click OK. So if I type 19.01, I get an error message. But if I enter 19, no problem. That's exactly double. If I enter 14, no problem. It's under double, which would be 1430, but 14.31, not going to work. So that's data validation custom to use a logical formula. One last example. Sometimes you have a column and you're entering values and you don't want any duplicates. Well, let's just see what a formula would look like over here to the side. And once we get it working, we'll come and copy it and paste it into the dialog box. How about COUNTIF? And COUNTIF usually has a range. Now I'm going to do something silly. How about B87 to B87? That's like looking at one cell reference. And then comma, the criteria will be the same cell. Check this out though. We're going to lock this first cell reference as an absolute F4. Now, right now, all it is saying, hey, in the range sunset, is there a sunset? So the count will be 1. But notice the second cell reference is not locked. So when I copy it down, this is an expandable range. If I click in the second cell and hit F2, oh, look, B87 was locked, but now B88 is moving. F2, 87, 89. It is expanding as we go down. And what happens if I type a second quad? The COUNTIF will give me 2. That means the 2 is the trigger to say, do not allow this data entry. Quad. And now it's a 3 that triggers and says, do not allow this. Actually, it'll never get to 3. But here's the deal. How are we going to convert this into a true-false for our custom formula? I'm simply going to come up to the top and say anytime the value COUNTIFs is less than 2. Notice, is 2 less than 2? False. Is 3 less than 2? False. Is 0 less than 2? True. Is 1 less than 2? True. So that true-false logical formula, double-click and send it down, will work. From the active cell at the top, I'm going to scoop this out and copy it in edit mode. Control-C, escape, and now I highlight. Alt-D-L, Tab, C, Tab, Control-V. And so now, in fact, I'll put an error message this time. No dupes. No dupes. Will be succinct. Click OK. And so now, there's some quads. If I go up to data validation and circle invalid data, boom. If I go and uncircle it, clear validation. All right, so I'm going to delete this. And now when I type a quad, autofill is trying to be polite, but data validation, no dupe, sorry. All right, and then I can type SP, the SP daft, boom. All right, that was a lot about data validation. We saw data validation custom with logical formulas. We saw data validation for date, time, and text length. We saw data validation list, and we saw ranges, define name, Excel table names, the indirect function, even dependent data validation based on another data validation list dropdown. We saw how to do data validation based on a decimal and even a whole number. All right, we'll see you next video.